Love this podcast? Support it and sponsor today. Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.
Welcome to Hong Kong Confidential. I'm Jules Hannaford and I'm your host. I'm an Australian woman and I've been living in Hong Kong for many years. I'm a mother, a teacher, an author, and I want to share my wisdom and the wisdom of others with you. Thanks for joining me, and I hope you enjoy the show.
You meet someone online and there's this instant connection. It's amazing how much the two of you just seem to click. They live somewhere far away and there's some plausible reason they can't travel to meet you. They tell you they're in love with you and you feel optimistic for the first time in a long time. They have a successful career, yet somehow they need money from you to solve a short-term problem, always with the promise of paying you back. Time goes on and they need more money more urgently. You've started to see the cracks and begin to wonder whether they've been lying this whole time. All of a sudden it hits you. You've been scammed. Fool Me Twice is the story of my mother, Jules Hannaford, a woman who was drawn into the dangerous world of sweetheart scams. After a trip overseas to meet a stranger, a dangerous altercation in a Manchester hotel room, and thousands of pounds lost for good, she's here to tell her story. Fool Me Twice, a true crime podcast, is available on Apple Podcasts, Ozcast Network, and anywhere you listen to your podcasts.
Today I'm here with Renee Boey. Hi Renee, thank you so much for joining me today.
Hi there, it's a pleasure.
Renee, tell me where you're from and how did you find yourself working in education?
Sure. I grew up in Hong Kong and I was educated here up till high school. And then I went to boarding school in the States and university in the States and then afterwards in the UK. Ever since I was a teenager, I started doing some volunteer work, working with kids who needed support academically and also just volunteering in different places like in the Hong Kong Society for the Deaf and working with some migrant children as well. And when I was in boarding school, I also started a program for refugees that were from Ethiopia and helping them get assimilated and learn English. So I think throughout my teenage years, I actually had a taste of helping others through the classroom, through education. And that just continued throughout my college, undergrad years and after. And so after graduate school, I felt that I wanted to do something that was very concrete, that was more tangible. And because I love English, I started teaching creative writing. And so that's how I got started initially. And then I decided to get my postgraduate diploma in education and to formally enter the profession. And since then, it's been wonderful to be able to teach what I love and also to grow as a teacher as my own interests evolved into social entrepreneurship and STEAM education, and now doing something like building a school.
Let's talk first about your education organisation, Baker and Bloom. How did that start and when did you decide to begin?
So I had been teaching at the ISF Academy during its early days when it was being launched. And after teaching there, I took a sabbatical. I got a degree in creative writing in San Francisco. And living in the Silicon Valley, I reconnected with a lot of my friends who were in the States, and many of them were starting to have careers in the startup world. And I saw that they were working in places like Airbnb, Google, Dropbox, where their offices looked like, I don't know, they were like warehouses and they were on scooters, zooming from one desk to another. There were huge cafeterias. It was sort of like college. And it just struck me that the world is really changing. And that was around the time when a lot of apps began to take over our lives. And so when I came back, I was going to go back to teach, but I decided that I wanted to do something that would more directly address this issue of like preparing kids for a new workplace and a new future. At around the same time, my husband was co-founding one of Hong Kong's first co-working spaces called Cocoon with his sister and his father. Cocoon was great because it was a hub of entrepreneurial activity. And I started doing a social entrepreneurship class there, and it evolved into a more formal organization, and I launched Baker and Bloom. From the start, Baker and Bloom has been about cultivating creativity and looking at those specific areas where maybe a traditional education did not directly address. We inspire kids to enjoy learning and to look towards the future.
Was it more of a tutorial centre for after school for students, or did you work with adults as well?
No, I'd say it's more like an enrichment and an education center in the truest sense of, because I think tutorial center does come with that connotation very often of doing things to support what is happening at school directly, often preparing for exams related to school and so on. Whereas really all our initial programs had to do with like design thinking, creative writing. We had a humanities class. We had classes like writing with Minecraft and Pokemon, getting kids to love to read again. In that sense, it's not like a typical tutorial center, but we do work outside of school hours. We have parent workshops. We've had since the very beginning, very regular parent workshops on topics like how to foster creativity at home, understanding the differences in different types of school systems, and understanding what a STEM education might look like. We really try to help parents understand what's happening in the shifting landscape of education, and especially with all the technology that's taking place and the new digital and media skills that have emerged. I think it's very important to really educate parents as well, because through that, you're actually directly supporting the children. That's kind of how we see ourselves as a K through 12 education center.
How do you describe the changing landscape of education to parents? What do you think we can expect in the future with education?
I think that there are some major trends, and three of the driving factors, I think, related to the changes have to do with research in brain science, with the acceleration of technology, and the globalization of everything. All of these forces, I think, have only been rising and accelerating, especially technology. This past year, with everything happening online, we have all felt it. It's not just how we use technology as tools to teach and also for kids to communicate with one another, but also how this is really reshaping society, reshaping values, and also what they need to learn and the mindsets they need to have in order to survive, let alone thrive. The point of education is partly to prepare kids for the future, whether it is professionally or personally. We have a responsibility in education to adapt and to be agile and respond to these changes in the world. I think that has resulted in shifts like, for example, the explosion of online learning from the beginning, like with the launch of Khan Academy in particular. That was a wonderful and phenomenal force in education. And since then, with like Coursera, edX, plenty of online classes that have allowed people from all over the world to connect with each other, different teachers connecting with students they might have never been able to reach and finding new audiences. And like with many industries, like journalism, for example, there are people who may not be professionally trained who are now empowered to take on those roles. So you have bloggers, right, in journalism that may not be professional journalists, but have a lot like citizen journalism. And similarly with teaching, there are people who are experts in the field of, say, coding, and maybe on the side, they're teaching coding, but they're not a full-time teacher. But I do think that unleashes a lot of wonderful transmission of knowledge, of teaching and connection that is redefining what it means to learn. And then at the same time, another area, like you mentioned with adults, I think learning really doesn't stop with formal education anymore. At the workplace, everyone expects each other to keep learning and adapting. We don't really have a choice, but it's also very exciting because it keeps us all on our toes. And it also means that work can always be dynamic and engaging. I think that personalization as a result of technology is another force that has allowed us to really see, instead of the school factory model where you're trying to, there's input and output, put in the students, you organize them by data of manufacture, like the date they're born, as Ken Robinson calls it, expecting them to come out to meet certain quality controlled standards. So that's no longer the type of employment world that we're looking at. And so with Industry 4.0, we're looking at the coming together of the cyber, the digital, the biological, And people need to first know about these things, but then also know how to work with technology. I think that's obviously going to reshape and redefine what should be taught, the content, the way we teach, how we teach, and in a way, almost why we teach too, because it is no longer just for one job and career track. I mean, I could go on.
That is a lot. Perfectly succinct and really actually rings true on so many levels. We've got so many resources in the community that we can use to educate our children. And I'm not sure if you're aware that I'm a teacher in an international school. But
oh, no, I wasn't.
Yeah, so I think we've been accessing people in the community as a part of a frontier program that we put together for our students to learn transferable skills and to bring in artificial intelligence and coding training and preparing for university and all these kind of things. And the program was hugely successful. So I think you've really hit the nail on the head now that education is going to start branching out more into the community and giving other people opportunities. What's the philosophy that underpins your organization?
So right now, Baker and Bloom is the education center. But what we're very involved in doing is launching a new school called Bloom Academy. The primary school will be called Bloom KKCA Academy. And we're working on launching the secondary school very soon as well. And so the philosophy that underpins both of these organizations is that to prepare kids for the future, we have to work on their creativity, that this is one of the human advantages that we have over machines. And so it is a very valuable asset that we have to cultivate, because without active cultivation, it can wither. And so that's one of our views. And then also we believe very firmly that education aspires towards service and towards making an impact that's positive. And so while we want individuals to self-actualize and to bloom, we definitely also feel that to truly thrive and to flourish, you have to be connected to a community and to feel that your work has value and your life has meaning. So I think the philosophy is that we don't just look at academics, although of course that is very important to us. Academic excellence is something we always encourage kids to strive for. But at the same time, we also think that cultivating their creative imagination, their ability to empathize, the process, understanding and reflecting on what type of learners they are, and thereby becoming better learners so that they can develop their own skills and interests and then make that impact. Those are the things that matter to us.
I think that's really wonderful. And I think that's a great approach. And it really builds a child's self-esteem and their sense of self and their ability to move forward in this ever-changing world. And resilience is super important as well, isn't it? Helping kids to develop resilience.
I mean, if you ask me, while I agree coding is very important as a new 21st century academic literacy, resilience is far more important because you don't know how the technology will change. I mean, in 20 years' time, we could have computers that code better than people. And so we may not need coders. I mean, right now we think the future is like, software engineering or coding. But I do think that we don't know how rapidly technology will change, but we do know that changes are coming and it's going to be continuous. And so resilience is almost the only thing that guarantees that we can adapt. And even when we face challenges, we have this inner resource to pull from to bounce back. I think resilience also has something to do with self-compassion. We want to have kids who empathize with others, but first they also have to know what it is to be compassionate towards themselves. And I think sometimes kids fail to be so-called resilient. When they're down, it's very hard to pick themselves up because they may be in a culture or they may believe that there is only one way to succeed. And if they don't attain that, of course, it is very crushing. If you feel like there's only one right answer and you can't get it, then you don't feel good about yourself. But I think that part of building that resilience at schools in education is showing kids that there are diverse ways to succeed, that even when you are doing something that is like math, where people are like, well, that's fine for the arts and humanities, but when it comes to STEM, there's a right answer. I would challenge that. There are many engineering solutions to the problem of climate change. There are many scientific solutions and approaches. Scientists disagree with one another. They certainly learn through their failure, right? I think history is full of examples of scientists making wonderful discoveries because of so-called failures, but persisting. Yeah, I completely agree with you that resilience is one of those core values that we have to teach and really teach it seriously, not just as a nice afterthought, but as a main focus.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this last year, with all of the changes with COVID and online learning, has really demonstrated the need even more than we ever imagined for resilience and being able to adapt to change. So it's really great that you have that philosophy. And I think it's also very important, and we do it in our school as well. Please tell me what STEM stands for our listeners out there who aren't aware.
Sure. STEM stands for science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And just to say a quick word about it, even though I'm not a STEM teacher myself, we offer STEM at Baker and Bloom, and we have a wonderful STEM director who's a former Lockheed Martin NASA engineer. And so I've learned a lot through my colleagues. But it really is the integration of these subjects. So science would be more traditionally, like, say, biology, physics, chemistry, whereas engineering has more to do with solving problems, coming up with solutions that have to do with the physical world and machines and understanding input and output and all of that. And with technology, a lot of that has to do with those digital tools and different machines also, but that serve specific purposes. And mathematics, I think, is kind of the language that underpins all of that. I think the difference between how we used to learn these subjects when we were in school versus how it's done more and more now is the interdisciplinary angle and learning to see the connections between these different subjects.
Yeah, there's absolutely something to be said for cross-curricular connections. It really is important these days, especially with the ever-changing world of work. You can't really just go down one particular line, can you?
No, and it's a way of being creative, right? Often people who are creative in one field are bringing in the lens of another field and the knowledge of another field that opens up new ground.
Yeah, absolutely. So you offer STEM courses at Baker and Bloom and in the Bloom Academy.
That's a big part of the Bloom Academy philosophy, that we do project-based learning that uses STEAM. In fact, we add the A, which is art. And so basically, instead of learning biology unit by unit the way we used to and go from one biological topic to another in the life sciences, we might look at a problem like COVID, let's say, because it's current, it's relevant, and everybody in the whole world is focused on this. And through that, you can learn about statistics. You can learn about data science and visualization. You can learn about the difference between viruses and bacteria, public health policy. There's a lot. You can learn about like mass design, which has to do with design and art and comfort, aesthetics. Any topic, really, if you think about it, certainly any major human social problem or climate problem has an interdisciplinary angle to it. And that's why we're very excited to adopt this project-based approach, which is just one aspect of innovation, but we think it's quite an important one.
So is Bloom Academy a through school? Does it go all the way to year 12 or 13?
Yes, that is the plan. We currently have plans to launch the primary school this year, this fall. So we have rolling admissions right now. And we intend to open the secondary in 2 years' time. So it will lead up to secondary all the way to grade 12 or year 13.
Tell me a bit about your philosophy, Think, Care, Act, which is something that I saw on your website for Bloom Academy.
Yes, actually, this what we call Care, Think, Act model underpins everything that we do at the school. With care, what we're talking about is first, as I was saying, with self-compassion, learning to take care of yourself, learning to care about others, to care about society, Hong Kong, where we all live in, and also the greater world. Care is important because a lot of times, one of the reasons kids get disengaged with learning, which is a huge challenge in learning, especially for schools, when there's so many other forms of learning that are so exciting, is that kids don't connect. They don't care about what they're learning. So they may be perfectly able to learn it, but they may not care. So teaching them to care is the first step. And then we move on to this idea of thinking through teaching different disciplinary lenses and different ways of thinking. So how does a mathematician think? How does a historian and artist think? How are those different and how are they similar? And then in particular, we emphasize 3 mindsets. The first is a growth mindset, which applies to the individual and the way you view learning and failure and the dynamic nature of ability. And then the second is creative and entrepreneurial mindsets, which has to do with connecting with others. So creativity is not just about yourself, but also innovating and solving problems that we all share and working with others. And then the third is sustainability mindset, because that has to do with our whole planet, whether it is like literal in terms of the climate or the idea of doing things that don't fizzle out immediately, that things a bit longer down the horizon. I think that's a very important ability. All of this comes together with ACT, because we're a school that has a bias toward action. Because education is about preparing, well, as John Dewey says, it isn't about preparing you for life. Education is life. So when you're learning, you should be doing. You should already be taking action. And through acting, you will care more. You will think deeper, more deeply. I hope that helps you understand why we value these three verbs so much. And as teachers, we embrace this ourselves. So we want to care about the students. We do care a lot about how they learn. We care about them as individuals. And we think a lot. So we do our research. We keep up with all the developments in our own fields and also in pedagogy and teaching. And then we take action every day as we interact with the kids and in building the school. I think that neatly captures what we're about.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. And it really does underpin the whole philosophy of preparing for the future and preparing for change. And also, these young people have to save our planet. It's up to them. So they've got to have an understanding of sustainability, don't they?
Yes.
We need them to.
We have a vested interest in
yes,
this,
we
all
do.
of us.
We
Yes.
absolutely do. So that's brilliant. Now, I noticed in the Baker and Bloom organisation that you use a 4-leaf approach. Do you use that in the Bloom Academy as well? And what is it?
So the 4-leaf approach is something I came up with when I started Baker and Bloom. Because when I started Baker and Bloom, I really was thinking, what are the key things that I want kids, my children, my students to develop? What are the key areas in this day and age in face of all of this, these changes? And the first leaf is communication and language arts. And with language, the definition of language has expanded to cover computer languages as well. But I think that language underpins our thinking. It's our vehicle of self-expression and communication, right? Like connecting to other people. So I think that's the first leaf. And then the second leaf is learning to learn, precisely because in this day and age, this is a key life skill. And it's often not taught explicitly in schools. So we've had a class called Super Learner that has been running for the past 7 years, teaches kids how their memory works, how to take notes, how to time manage, how to beat procrastination, and to understand that you can basically have a system to learn in a very rapid way and to learn what type of a learner you are. So that self-awareness, I think, is important. And then the third area is creativity, which is really our mission as well. But for us, it's not just necessarily making art or designing things, but also having a creative mind. So when you look at something, thinking of alternative options and possibilities, making associations that might be unusual, looking at things from a fresh angle, asking questions, asking good questions. That's a very important creative skill. And then the last leaf is leadership and service. And that has to do with your character. It has to do with, as I said, the purpose of education, whether it is choosing books that have morals and themes that we feel are relevant. We've been teaching AI through literature for the past 5 years ago. We talk about genetic engineering as well, issues like migration, social media and its impact on kids' identity and self-awareness. All of that we integrate into every subject. This is a philosophy that very much we carry over to Bloom. Those are still, whatever the organization, those are still the fundamental areas that our team believes that children need and we should focus on.
Also, I was thinking while you were saying that it's also really important for students to understand what their own values are and what their character strengths are and to develop those. And it sounds like your program would really do that beautifully.
Oh, I'm so glad you brought that up, Jules, because positive education is one of the 3 pillars of our school. And positive education to us includes character education and wellness, well-being. And one way we really put this front and center is that every day throughout primary school, we have campfire. And we have this not just in the beginning of the day, like homeroom, but also at the close of the day. So there's also the reflection that we go through together and have this moment of respite, of coming together instead of like frantically just running for the bus to gather and to just think, okay, what did I learn today? How am I feeling? And similarly to open the day. And we have a curriculum that comes from the Institute of Positive Education, developed through Geelong Grammar School and the work of Martin Seligman. Like you said, the strengths. I love how positive psychology and positive education really thinks about, well, how do people who thrive do well? What are their mental tools? And why not give our children these gifts instead of waiting until some midlife crisis or like teenage mental breakdown and then suddenly go, okay, now we need to deal with it. And prevention is better than cure. So
absolutely. I can really see that you're thinking outside of the box in the way that you educate, and you're bringing in all of these ideal philosophies and ideal programs to meld them together to create children who are ready for the future. And it's so interesting. Today I was teaching a lesson on public speaking, and I decided to bring in a meditation and creative visualization aspect to it before they did their public speaking. And the kids loved it. And just for them to be able to do like the campfire and just sit and have that 5 minutes of meditation, recognize like none of them really even knew what creative visualization was and how that they could really project in their minds the success that they were going to have. These are such great tools to teach kids that I wish I knew when I was at school.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, remember in the beginning, I talked about one of the 3 forces changing education is brain science. And I think the more we've discovered about the brain, about sleep, about how memory works, how creativity works, the power of visualization in its relation to reality, the more we're trying to integrate and bring that into the classroom, the good practices. I mean, we've evolved so much in other ways in terms of communication and all these tools that we're able to manipulate every day and use. Why shouldn't we know our own brains better, right? And if we have discoveries, shouldn't they be applied in the classroom? I'm so glad to hear that you did that. We also, when we teach public speaking, do centering exercises, things that get them connected to their bodies. Because public speaking, a big aspect of that is also your physical delivery. I think in this digital age,
be centered and calm.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Not just teenagers, but I mean, I have 2 sons who are under the age of 5. And I feel even they also are beginning to step into the virtual world. It's not that they're disembodied, but that connection to your physical being, your breath, where you are, how you're feeling. Are you tired? Are you feeling grumpy because you're tired and sleepy or hungry or thirsty? We forget that because we're so absorbed in this intriguing and fascinating virtual reality.
I know. And now that we're working online so much because of COVID, we have to remind students to take a break and to get outside and to do physical activity and do self-care activities as well. So that's got to be built into the education programs, doesn't it?
Exactly.
So that it becomes a lifestyle and a way that they self-manage.
Yes. And that's why the Forest program is actually a component of our school program.
Tell me about your Forest Academy and what do you do there?
So we have a forest program that's integrated into our field trips, because one of the distinctive things about our school is that we have weekly field trips. It's part of the idea that we feel learning, we know, goes beyond the classroom, but it's not just then online, but the whole city can be our campus. And if we see it that way, we need to give children that chance to go outside and see the city. A big part of Hong Kong is actually nature and wildlife, which is surprising to many people, although this year maybe more people have explored what Hong Kong has to offer by way of nature than most other years. Forest education, both in Northern Europe and also in the UK, is very developed, in Germany as well. It has to do with using the whole of nature as your classroom. So it's not really just about learning about plants, so though that can be a big part of the curriculum, but it's really teaching anything that you can teach in a normal class, a regular classroom, out in the open, and using what you find to illustrate those ideas. So it could be learning about mathematics, the Fibonacci sequence through looking at a leaf. It could be just arranging things in different sizes or categorizing things with younger kids, but using what they find. It just nature, the unpredictability of it and the beauty of it is inspiring. And it's something that's like, it's free, it's out there, it's part of being human. Giving kids, restoring that into their lives is why we have the Forest program. And then on Saturdays, as part of our enrichment program, kids who are particularly passionate about this can also join our Forest Adventure program. And we do have a partnership with a group in Tai Tam Tuk where there's a lot of open space and nature to run these programs. And we also have an in-house forest educator. So we're very lucky.
Wow, that's impressive. I'm so impressed.
Yeah, we're very happy about that.
And what we also know now, how important nature is for well-being. So it's not only this resource that we have, but it's also something that is really vital for the well-being of the children as well. And it's so great to see it growing in education in Hong Kong, because it's very new as a way of teaching in Hong Kong, isn't it?
Yes. I mean, I know that there's some places that use beach education as well, which I think is brilliant because that's also a unique feature of Hong Kong. Totally wonderful to see people creating, and actually we're exploring that too, forest playgrounds where you learn to build your own playground. I mean, really appreciating all the nature in Hong Kong. So yes, I think it's really wonderful to see more schools and educators and parents really interested in this. And I think that's a silver lining with this year of COVID, because parents themselves have rediscovered their connection to nature.
If I was a parent looking for a school for my child, I would absolutely want that to be a part of the curriculum. So I think it's brilliant that you're doing that. You're a bilingual school where you cultivate compassionate creators and social innovators. Why is this important? Not only to be bilingual, but to be sort of social innovators.
Thanks for asking that. That's actually the mission of our school, to cultivate compassionate people. So the adjectives compassion and social are as important to us as being creators and innovators. So I've already talked about how the world's changing, how we need people who can adapt and are not just good at execution, but also adapting and creating new value, which is how we see innovation. And also creators is just more all-encompassing than just maybe an artist or a scientist and engineer, but anything where you are making things or recombining things as well. So we feel that ethical dimension is hugely important, because technology can be a tool or it can become a master of your own life. And we really don't want to. We want to be mastering technology, not the other way around. And if we aren't aware of it, a lot of our values become embedded in technology. We obviously want positive and humane values to be embedded and not just accidental values or even negative values. So I think that it is very important that the people who are developing these new technologies and policies around technologies understand and respect that there is a moral framework around the development of all of this, right? And that ultimately, I mean, I imagine in the future, we may have people who are virtual surgeons, who are drone managers, and who are space excavation specialists, and, all of these things. But at the end of the day, we're trying to serve one another, humans, right? So our jobs will center around humans in some way, even if they are about, let's say, more to do with material things. There's still an impact on humans, and humans have an impact on the material world. So I think that if we care about humans, we can't just care about the technological part of our society, but also issues like justice, equity, right? And taking care of one another. Like if you have a driverless car, it has to make life or death decision. And you certainly wanted to make ones that are not just about numbers, but also take into account safety and the value of life. I guess this is a long way of saying that our school really tries to balance a quality STEM education with education in moral reasoning, the humanities, history. Because while we are future oriented, to be prepared for the future, we must look at the past. We must learn from our mistakes and all the progress that we've made, all the philosophical progress as well, and all our history of nations interacting with one another, and all the conflict and the resolution and the progress. So, I mean, I think we have a very hopeful view of mankind, of humankind, but we are also realistic that if we are not vigilant, things don't necessarily end up in a positive way. Our mission is to make sure that there is that compassion and this idea that it's not just about your own gratification, but also the impact you're having on others. Just to very quickly say a word about bilingualism. We are in Hong Kong. Biculturalism, bilingualism is the DNA of the city. It's the coming together of East and West. And we are a school that is based in Hong Kong. It's a Hong Kong school. Wherever you're from, the city is what unites us right now. We feel that giving children the power to speak both languages makes sense historically and also makes sense looking into the future. English and Mandarin, Putonghua are both world languages. And I think that if we want them to be able to access job opportunities, career opportunities, life opportunities, and cultural opportunities, it will benefit them so much to have more than one language and more than one perspective of the world, so they can be more open-minded in their approach to life.
I couldn't agree with you more, and you've just put it so succinctly and clearly. Thank you so much. Renee, why do you think it's important to teach entrepreneurship to your children?
I'm actually not at all a business-minded person. I mean, I'm an English literature major, studied Renaissance literature. Books is what I love and care about, and teaching. But what I've learned is that entrepreneurship is actually a necessary life skill. And it isn't just about startups making a quick buck, but really about seeing problems as opportunities. And when resources are limited, how can we create value? And so I've been very inspired by Cocoon, the incubator that I mentioned, and the work that it's done in entrepreneurship education. Cocoon has set up a foundation focusing on that, and I'm an advisor in that foundation. And the team there really have reached out to many secondary schools to spread ideas of entrepreneurship as a life skill. And through helping to design the curriculum and working with the students in different schools, I've seen that there's so much creativity, desire to collaborate, desire to really take their learning and connect it to the real world among students from all types of schools. Even students who are like half asleep when you enter the room, a bit of a design thinking workshop, you can wake them up. Talk about what does a smart home look like? How can you design a kitchen utensil for people who only have one hand? Give them a challenge, and it's a game. But if you activate that creativity and give it a real context, a real world context, so they see that this game can help people, can apply, it can also help them support themselves financially, which is an important life skill, that motivates them to want to learn. So I feel it's very in line with everything we've been talking about creativity, making a difference. The entrepreneurial mindset is actually the beginning point, which is not to be depressed by all the problems we see, because it is overwhelming. I mean, you used that word earlier, and the information that we have access to means also we have access to all these problems and heavy things. A young person needs a view that tells them, yes, there's a lot of weight and heaviness and problems in the world, but we also, as a species, have developed all these ways to solve them. And it's happening all over the world. And you will be able to find like-minded people if you have resilience and that desire and those strengths that you're working on. So I think entrepreneurship is about cultivating that.
And it's not only about cultivating that, but it's also about young people recognizing that they have the opportunity to become entrepreneurs as adults. Like, it is a legitimate career path now. Whereas when I was a child, it was not even a word that was invented.
No,
certainly wasn't an option as a career when I was a kid. Well, and now it really is a possibility. So it's quite amazing how things change.
I mean, it's funny you say that you didn't think about it as a kid. I didn't either. But then again, Hong Kong is a city built by entrepreneurs. And so I think it is also part of the DNA of our city. And to reignite that and to continue that, sustain that as we become, part of the Greater Bay Area. And as a city, we also have to adapt and evolve and remember that entrepreneurial spirit. What you said reminded me that a big part of it is ownership, right? Taking ownership over your learning and over your career. So that is a possibility because of this brave new world of technology and different ways we've organized society. Yes, I agree. It's amazing. It's actually a huge gift that people can be entrepreneurs or intrapreneurs, where they're working within an organization.
Yeah, absolutely. So does everything that we've just talked about really speak to your quote that I found on your website, which is how you reimagine the whole journey of learning? That encompasses everything that we've discussed, doesn't it?
Yes. So our secondary school, we plan to start the day much later than a normal school. That's brain science. So kids are not awake at 8 a.m. I mean, teenagers, they're not. Little children are, but not secondary kids. And
especially boys.
Especially boys. So actually, we plan to start after, 9:30. And I think that will be healthier for them. They'll get more sleep. So things like that, from when school starts to what the timetable looks like. Things like weekly field trips. That's not rocket science, right? Introducing field trips are a part of many schools, but just to say, why not do them more regularly? Why not look at both, not just city and museums and galleries and all of that urban stuff, but also nature, and reimagining how teachers work together as well, because we also need the time to collaborate. And I think a big part of the school is that we have outstanding teachers who want to be doing this pioneering, innovative work to reimagine that journey. It takes ownership of the teachers too, to not just say, well, this is how I was trained. This is the system our school uses, so I'm just going to follow it, which is hard enough. I mean, believe me, I have full respect for doing that. But I also think that in order to teach kids to be creative, entrepreneurial, teachers have to be that way as well. So reimagining how schools work. And I guess that is the difference between what I was doing with Baker and Bloom and with Bloom Academy. So with Bloom Academy, I'm really trying to think about a school model and how that as a living system can help create people that will go out there and make all of these changes, and their parents hopefully will be influenced. And through that, more and more, like kind of the ripple effect. And I hope this will be the first of many schools that embrace these ideals and reconsider how schools can be organized as well. But most importantly, it's really the student's journey, giving them that ownership, that say with projects like choice. If you don't give them that freedom, they won't learn ownership. If you do, and you support them and scaffold them step by step, it takes a lot of work from our side, like the educator and the designer side, to make sure that freedom has the right parameters and constraints and scaffolding so that it is truly an education and not like throwing you into the deep end. And so step by step, they're growing to become these compassionate creators and social innovators.
Really looking forward to the future. So that's what you're doing as an educator with your school.
Absolutely. Like project management skills, like how you teach that to a grade 12 kid is different from a grade 7 student, but it can also be taught to a grade 1 student. Project management, they can understand, what is the purpose? What are we trying to accomplish? And how can you do a part and I can do a different part and work together? So they're learning it, but we need to break it down and deconstruct it carefully as teachers.
What sort of qualities do you possess to be a leader of such an innovative educational institution?
I think I have a thirst for learning and for self-improvement and also that positive impact. I think that like anybody else, you have your moments of despair and sort of like, oh, what can we do to make a difference? But of course, I think that I do have an inherent optimism that might lift other people's spirits up when they feel down as well. And also this vision that I really believe that if we work together, there are ways we can improve, and education can be this one of the most important forces in creating a better world. So it's very cheesy, but I just have this, I guess, rather naive optimism that it can be done, and that if teachers are allowed to do what they're called to do, to trust them and be open-minded about the different ways we might achieve this. So, for example, I didn't know as much about STEM, about forest education, but as I said, my colleagues have taught me. And so I think maybe that's one quality, which is recognizing the strengths in others and bringing us together under this vision.
And being happy to be a lifelong learner. And I can also see that you're forward thinking and that you've got a growth mindset as well. I can tell that about you just from having this conversation, which is really cool.
You. And you clearly do as well. It's so cool that you're a teacher.
Yeah. I've been teaching in Hong Kong for 20 years.
Oh, wow.
Oh, yeah. This is my 31st year as a teacher.
Wow. Clearly a lifelong learner.
Yes,
and
I love it.
And great to see how the field has evolved. I'm sure you have a lot of thoughts on that.
It has evolved so much, but I love that further step that you're taking, and I can see how innovative it is. And it's unique to Hong Kong in many ways. And I just wonder, do you think you'll have trouble getting the buy-in from parents who are used to a certain kind of structured, formal type of education? How can you get them on board? Although I know even by asking that, I can see just from talking to you that you're very convincing and you put together a wonderful argument for your style of education. So I guess I can see how you're going to do it. But do you have any fears or concerns about that?
One of the lovely things about Baker and Bloom is that we're very neutral. We work with kids from all types of schools, local schools, ESF, international schools, DSS schools, boarding schools. And it's given me a window into all these different systems. In fact, I think that many schools systems are very valid. Traditional school, I went to a very traditional boarding school and a very traditional college. I mean,
so did I.
Very old college. And I think there's something so valuable about heritage, about rituals and traditions. I think that, like with almost everything, there are many different versions of good. And what we're offering is not the perfect school and like, oh, we are the best. Certainly not. In fact, Baker and Bloom, that's one of the philosophies of our name, that it's not about getting the biggest slice of the pie, but about baking, learning how to bake a pie to create value. So I think what we're doing is offering a version that we believe in. And hopefully by executing it well, I think that's the real challenge. Before I think about other people's buy-in, I and our team have to do our part, make this the best possible school that we can, so that it's not just talk, right? I mean, we can all talk about what would be great, but to be able to deliver that, that's the first step towards buy-in. And I hope that the track record of the past 7 years with Baker and Bloom, supporting many kids in their education, and we have wonderful graduates that have come back to intern with us. I think they enjoy the environment we provide, and parents who've sent their younger kids to us, right, through the years. I think that attracts people when you can actually deliver on what you say. And then also, I think that the other aspect is that people are experiencing the change in their own lives, in their own workplace. I mean, 7 years ago, I was talking about the exact same things, and people were like, oh, yes, we have to be agile. And yes, the world is going to change very rapidly. But now it's reality. So
yeah, it's beyond our expectations of how change would have occurred.
And so I think they understand in their own jobs how much they have to be creative and to be flexible, and how important it is to be bilingual. So a lot of things that we're proposing is not really radical. It's quite practical, in fact. So
absolutely, totally, I agree.
People are practical if you can actually help them achieve what their goals are. So it's not really like, oh, we have these goals, and then we're trying to convert you to also want our goals. But it's more like this school is designed for students, for the families. It's design thinking. We empathize. I'm building it because I feel that parents have that frustration. Students have that frustration as well, and teachers too, with some other models. And so maybe there's a different way. So hopefully it's actually natural attraction. And then, of course, I think there have been increasingly different models appearing in Hong Kong. And so it's not just our school that's spreading these ideas of progressive education. I'm sure the work you're doing in your classroom and other places like Duke Forest Education help people understand. And we're just bringing together, as you said, all these best components in a way that makes sense to us, hopefully helps the children in the best way given our Hong Kong context. I think that might be the creative part of our school, that we're not an import or trying to recreate something somewhere else, but really building based on the needs of Hong Kong, our location, and this time and this space.
Yeah, completely. That makes complete sense. What have you learned from your students about life lessons and education?
Oh, that's a great question. No one ever asked me that.
I love it. I've come up with a new question.
I learned so much from my students. You said about life and about education. I mean, I teach students of different ages. So they teach me different things. Things don't have to have a purpose for younger kids. They live in the moment. If it's engaging to them, they're engaged. They can't pretend. If you're boring, you've lost them. I feel there's this authenticity that they teach me, that being present and in our bodies, right? And our physical needs are important to take care of. Because I think when I look at a young child, not just my children, but my young students, I really want to attend to their physical needs, not just their cognitive needs. And then I think, why don't I attend to those needs myself or towards other adults, right? I should do that too. Whereas when we sometimes grow older, we might have kind of a harsher way of evaluating other people. But I think they teach me that we're physical beings and we need to be present. And then my older students, I think I love how in this day and age, they think about the environment, they think about the planet. Their world is much bigger than what it was for me as a teenager. And I think the fact that they're not overwhelmed by it is already a miracle. Like they have definitely co-evolved with the technology. And in many ways, it's not even about us like leading them to be good digital citizens. they're figuring out the new social norms, the new etiquette of how to communicate and bringing the values that we've taught them that are traditional online. And so seeing how they do it inspires me to think about not just the fears and the sort of the threat that often we feel towards social media and technology, but also to think about, well, this is a reality. So how do we make the best of it? How do we make it fun, creative, to enhance and solve problems? So I think the fact that they don't come with that baggage that maybe I, as a person from a different generation, do, helps me see the technology and with fresh eyes. And also, I think at that stage in life where they are very hopeful. So like I said, I am an optimistic person, but it certainly helps to be fueled by the optimism of younger people.
Yeah,
too.
Absolutely. And the creativity and compassion of younger people. I love that as well.
Yes, it's so
Renee,
genuine.
Yeah, so genuine. Renee, tell me, what are your hopes for the future, both professionally and personally?
I think professionally, I really hope that this school makes the change that we're aiming for, that we will draw more and more students to our school and families so that they can also be better prepared and be future wise. So I love this idea of not just being future proof or future ready, but wise about the future. I can work with colleagues who are committed to this. And I think it's such a fulfilling job. If I'm able to just build this school well, that will already be one of the greatest professional gratification that I could hope for and dream of. And it's such a privilege to have a chance to build a school. I think personally, I have my own family and I'm raising two young boys. And I hope that I raise them to be good and kind people. And I also hope that I can balance building the school with building my family, and to do that with respect with some self-compassion, with a little more self-compassion. I think I do need to do that myself. Yeah, to balance those two things in a way that's realistic. That's already a very high bar.
Yeah, that's a high bar, isn't it? For sure. Renee, where is Bloom Academy and when do you open?
So we're located in Pak Tin, which is in the Shek Hip Mei area in Kowloon. And we are going to open in September 2021. And so we have rolling admissions, as I mentioned. We have info sessions. So definitely check out our website and find out more about when that can happen. Yeah, it's just bloom.edu.hk. And you can find out more about the dates and the specifics. And then the secondary, we hope in 2 years, we will also be able to launch the secondary.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much, Renee. It's been so enlightening talking to you. And as one educator to another, I felt very inspired by your passion and your knowledge and just your drive. And we are shaping the lives of the young people as educators. So it's really wonderful to see. And it's been so lovely to meet you and talk to you. I hope that your school has every success. I'll put the link to your school and to the Baker and Bloom Academy in my show notes so people can find you. And just thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been really, really wonderful to talk to you.
Thank you, Jules. You've been wonderful and asking such thoughtful questions. So this has been a real pleasure.
You're welcome. And for my listeners out there, if this is something that you've enjoyed, please share it with your friends and family. If you know anybody who has a child who'd be interested in going to the Bloom Academy in the next couple of years, please refer them to this podcast. If you could go to iTunes to rate and review us, that'd be great. It will help Hong Kong Confidential get up the iTunes charts, and it will also help more people find Renee's amazing school, the Bloom Academy. So thanks again, Renee. It's been absolutely amazing, and it's been a real pleasure to meet you.
Thank you.
Hi, Confidants. I want to tell you about my Patreon page. I've joined Patreon in the hope of getting sponsorship for my Hong Kong Confidential podcast. Patreon is a great way for my listeners to get on board and sponsor me with monthly payments, and that goes towards my production costs and rewards for my members. If you're interested in checking out my Patreon page, please go to patreon.com and search up Jules Hannaford or Hong Kong Confidential. I would really appreciate you visiting my page. So that brings us to the end of another Hong Kong Confidential podcast. I'm Jules Hannaford. Thanks for joining me, and I hope you'll be with me again next week. If you enjoyed today's podcast, please can you go to iTunes to rate and review it? I would really appreciate your feedback. You can email me at jules@hongkongconfidential.net, and you can find me on Facebook and Instagram at Hong Kong Confidential. If you'd like to hit me up on Twitter, it's at Jules Hannaford. I would love to hear from you.
Love this podcast? Support it and sponsor today. Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.